And I think that paradigm is something that we could absolutely bring forward. And I wonder whether or not, and this is hubris talking here, but I wonder whether or not religion would have found itself with a bit more in the way of longevity if it allowed for a bit in the way of iteration. Because there's
100%.
Yeah, there's so much value
that's
to
science.
it. Yeah, there's so much value to all of the religions and we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and it's so sad and scary to watch.
The rules of life. Everything in this universe is perfectly balanced. Yin and yang, light and dark. But what if there was something that was disrupting your life's equilibrium, stopping you from receiving the health and wealth you deserve, stealing your happiness? To help you on your gifted path, your next set of remarkable masters are waiting. One of the top 50 digital marketing thought leaders in the United States, and a thought and energy transformation facilitator who will all help you answer the question, how do I live a happy life?
So when I curate people for this show, part of it is because I get the opportunity to share one of my gifts, which is connection. And when I was thinking of each of you, I wanted to have you both on the show. And then I realized I wanted you both together. And I love surprise. I love Easter eggs. I love delight. I love awe. Like I love when things click for people and they get it. And I see patterns, and I've seen some patterns that connect the two of you that you don't know yet. And part of the fun of this conversation is for when you both realize what I see. I'm not going to reveal it. I'll maybe create a bit of an open loop for you and everyone watching and listening. But I want to dive in, and we'll start with a bit of origin story stuff just to give our audience some context. And I want to do this quick because I don't typically do bios and that kind of thing. In this instance, I want to give context to each of you. So Kasim, can you share a bit about what your company does and why it's so freaking awesome?
I have the #1 ranked Google Ads agency on the planet, and we drive traffic.
In a very, we're probably not going to be talking about Google Ads. Well, this is another thing I love about the show. I bring on some of the most epic people who are thought leaders or experts in their space, and we typically don't even talk about their stuff. Because I'm sure I can hear your stuff on all your videos, and you've been interviewed a million times, both of you, right? I want to go into rabbit holes that maybe no one's ever heard you talk about before. Thad, what about you? I mean, this is a very...
Yeah.
I'm curious how you answer. If I had to introduce you to Kasim, we're at
depends on what circle I'm in. So I say I wear 3 hats. I oversee about 50,000 patients a year in our clinics, helping reverse chronic disease. I went down because my mom got really sick and couldn't find answers. And then I got into real estate kind of haphazardly, and I'm pretty good at that. And then I got tired of paying taxes. So I figured out the wealthy don't pay taxes. So I started learning the secrets of that. So now we teach entrepreneurs how to reduce and eliminate taxes so they can put their money toward doing what they want, when they want, with who they want. So really it's health, wealth, and making an impact and showing up big in the world.
And one thing I will start with respect to both of you, is I feel like there's a bit of rebellion and a bit of, if we were in Star Wars, we'd be the rebels.
Well, there has to be, right? I mean, because in the entrepreneurial space, if you're not on the edge of that bell curve, you're probably not creating anything really of significant value.
And that's what I want to dive deep into today. The value, I love the word value, actually, is value that's being created, but also values that we have that shape our decisions. And I think one of them is around freedom. And I want to start with something I don't know, which is Kasim's rules of life. And I've heard about this thing called Kasim's rules of life. I don't know what they are, and I'm curious to know what the rules are.
It's something that I prepared for my children, and I'm pulling them up now because they're long, and I'm not going to bore anybody with them, but I just want them to be able to reference. I have, and interestingly, another crossover force. It's not something I bring up other than I think it's applicable. I have some pretty significant health issues, and I question my longevity. And in so doing, and I know that sounds dramatic, but I'm a pragmatist and I'm also a data nerd. And so for me, it's like, all right, I have a problem and I'm going to solve it. And there are multiple, it's a multivariant issue. And on one side is like, oh, I can heal myself and I'll be around for my grandkids. And then on the other side is I might have a couple years left. And if that's the case, then I want to plant seeds for my children that outlive me. And the idea behind it was exactly that. How do I give them the principles that they can then take and update themselves? And what I did is I taught them one rule every week for some time. And it's about 5.5 minutes long now to get them to go down the list. But it's Pavlovian in nature. It's prompt response. And so, and it's been going on since they were like, my youngest was, I don't know what, 18 months. But I say, what's the most important thing? And then they say truth. I say, what's the second most important thing? And they say responsibility. What's the third most important thing? And they say love. What's love? A verb. What's the most powerful force in the world? An individual, so on and so forth. And they get more and more complex as the children got older. And some of them are massively utilitarian. I say, what are the 5 keys to situational awareness? Function, allies, resources, threats, oddities. And they know what that means. What are the 3 steps in an emergency situation? And these, my little guys are 5 and 7 now, and they can just rattle this off. And what's interesting is the rules have saved my son's life. My youngest was choking, and he stayed stone calm. He had a gummy vitamin stuck in his throat. I almost broke a rib doing Heimlich. I couldn't get it out of him. I ended up having, thank God, one of those little chokers, and I was able to pull this thing out of his face. And the first thing he goes, Daddy, I stayed calm. Because that's one of the 3 steps to an emergency situation. Is step number 1, stay calm, emotions are deadly. And so I've planted these seeds that I see them draw upon. One of the rules is hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. And my eldest son, he made a mess or something in his room. And I remember watching him, he was despondent, and he sits down and he hangs his head and he goes, I made an easy choice. Like they've really internalized it. And some of them I don't expect them to really understand. I have like Aristotle's golden mean. They can define ideologies. What is empiricism? But I have planted seeds for later, because they're going to go off and do their own thing. They're going to be 16-year-old little assholes that smoke weed and get in trouble. But I want there to be a foundational, indestructible context from which they will make their mistakes too. And I don't have religion. I wish I did. I feel that whole, but without that, the best I could do was trying to offer my children principles. And I feel like I just spoke way too long, y'all. I'm so sorry.
Don't ever apologize. That was, not only was that brilliant, I already feel Thad lighting up. Like, I get it. I get it, Gio. I get it.
I see it on several levels there. Yeah.
So what do you see so far?
I mean, I love what you're saying there, because to me, when I think what you're instilling, what you're talking about is not only beautiful, and I saw the parallels. I remember when my mom would take us on walks when we were kids, she'd always say, what's the most powerful force in the universe? And of course the answer is always love, right? So, starting from that, but I think to your point, which I really admire and I really respect, is that, and I wish there was more of this in the world, in that we had this foundational criteria-based decision-making out there. And not to go down the whole rabbit hole of the pandemic, but when that all started, there was several groups of people. And I think one of the things was there was there was a principle. What I like to try to do is try to be intellectually honest and say, okay, I don't think this is the best. Let me back up. This decision isn't without fault, but I believe it's the best decision. And I'm not pretending that it's the perfect decision, but I believe it's the best decision. And we're looking at 2 less than ideal scenarios.
And the balance of risks.
Right. And so I think having principled criteria-based decision-making is so critical. So the fact that number one, that you recognize that and that you're instilling in your kids is like, if this message could go out to the world, it would create so much more of togetherness versus this continual tribal issues that we find, even if it's, something with Will Smith, it's like, even like that's now like turned into this whole tribal thing, or COVID. Like it's like you have to be in a camp as opposed to it's be okay in the middle and say, this is my criteria, this is how I make decisions. And then when stuff comes in, you can assess it. Like you said, like, here's this emergency, and he could have thrown it all out, but he said, hey, Dad, I stayed calm because I remember that. And that was how we make decisions. And, sounds like it maybe contributed to saving his life.
With respect to the health issue concept, can you, Thad, share the story of your mom and how that led you into the health sphere first?
Yeah. So I have pictures of me when I was 10 years old on our homestead. And when I say homestead, I'd say, think of Little House on the Prairie, for those of you that remember that show, because that's what it was like. My parents moved up. There were a couple of hippies, bought a piece of property out in the middle of the Oregon wilderness, pitched a tent, and started building a house. Like literally no roads, no running water, no electricity, no phones. We didn't have a phone until they were there like maybe 3 or 4 years. It's kind of one of those things where we had to like ski down to the road. The school bus was 3 miles away. There's still not electricity up there.
There's still not electricity today.
There's solar.
Wow.
My parents got solar before it was cool. And like years ago, right? To tell you where it is, hunters would get lost and they would stumble onto our property. That's where hunters would like come out to our pasture confused and disoriented, not knowing where they were. And so my parents worked hard, and my mom was on full disability. The doctors didn't know what was wrong. She went to expert after expert kind of thing, like had braces on her arms. She couldn't function. And there was a time where she was like, kind of sit in her, well, not kind of, she would sit in her rocking chair looking over the pasture and, wonder if she could just take a pill to end it, if that would be better, because she was a liability. I mean, a good day for her was she could check the chickens, and that was the extent of it. So going into, so like when you said earlier about Gio, about being a rebel, I think that really is. I mean, you have to be on the edge of that bell curve if you want to make a change, and you have to be willing to take a lot of no's and to take a lot of flack in that process to get there. And one of the examples I was using the other day, I was on this interview, and I thought of, if you remember that, like back in science class, that little like 4 square thing, if you have like a white flower and a red flower, and what is it, the Medela genes or whatever, and like a white and white will give you white, a white and red will give you pink and pink, and then a red, red and red will give you red. So you have like those 4 options, right? But I was thinking it's in the world, I think it's even more pronounced than that. And I would even say it's probably more than Pareto's principle. Rather than 80-20, I would almost say you have 2 types of people. And I think this crosses over a lot of different flavors. You have an individual, which can be, I'd even say maybe 95% of people are going to be conventional wisdom, status quo, mindset, et cetera, follow the norm. And then you have 5% that are the dreamers and the shakers, the believers, the people that think, hey, there's like, we can go to Mars. And then on the other axis, you have, I'd say, the experts, and you have 95% of experts that follow the standard, and then 5% that are outside the box. So I think of my mom. My mom was in that 5%er group of, here's this pioneer living out in the middle of the woods, leaving her whole family behind, this whole thing. But she was finding doctors that were in the 95% category. And for her, it wasn't until she had a son that was in that 5%er. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just thinking like, I'm just being outside that box there. That was, hey, let's find a different way. So you have to think of, and I don't know what the math is on that, how that works out statistically, but to get a 5%er and a 5% to match up is statistically very rare, because if you're just throwing a dart at the board, that's what you're probably going to hit. So I think of how many people in the world are not like your kids, Kasim, that don't have that 5%er mindset criteria that you have, that are going to run into the 95% of people that are going to start choking at the next birthday party. And they're going to lose their shit because they don't have that basis. And so your kids are probably going to feel like the odd ones until they start to find their school of genius, or like with the comics, like with Gio. We'll make that reference there.
Thank you.
So I have this is not my place, Thaddeus, because it's your thesis. So forgive the intrusion, but you sparked something And I think that's brilliant, by the way. Like you have two axes, right? So you have the
Yeah.
the 5%ers in the space of what would you call that? The way that they're structured
It's
to
the
think.
outliers, or it's the tip of the bell. It's on the edge of the bell curve, the periphery.
Yeah, so the outliers in the way that they live, and then the outliers in the way that they think. And the outliers in the way that they live it's probably innate. And I think in this is the part that I'm going to ask forgiveness on. And I know Gio's going to say stop apologizing. The outliers in the way that they think. I think that the 5%, the catalyst is generally exposure. I think that we've been blessed with the exposure to information other people have been blessed with. The 5% that are the outliers on the other axis, I think that that's trauma response. I think most of those people have gone through, and I think that's the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur, in my experience, and this is almost a ubiquitous truth, that ability to move outside of the Overton window is a trauma response. And it's only because, this thing that worked for the other 95% not only didn't work for me, because those people just get pushed out to the peripherasis, but they're still in the 95%. Not only did it not work for me, it actually was probably catastrophically damaging. And it's funny because I love what you said about, how could 5% be connected with 5%? Because I picture like this Venn diagram where the circles almost don't even touch.
Right.
But I'm wondering whether or not we could reverse engineer it or force the issue, because you take the people that have had the exposure that other people haven't had, and that's how you identify the 5% on one axis. And then you take the people that have had and survived the trauma. That's how you identify the people on the other axis. And then you sort of figure out where the overlap is. And I feel like we could almost reverse engineer the commingling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's like with Archangel and some of these different groups, it allows for that playground for that to take place, which I think is well said. And I think, and please know I don't want to make it sound like the 95% are better or worse, or the 5% are better or for worse. It's just because here's the thing. I'm in the 95% in probably the majority of things.
Hundreds of layers of analysis. I think that's a really interesting multivariant point too. It's like when it comes to health, you're in the 5%, but maybe when it comes to, fitness or finances, well, not finances for you, but you know what I mean? For somebody else. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And that's it. Right. And I think to me, it's setting up like the heuristics that you've set up for your kids. It's, to me, I really love. I think that the sign of true intellectual honesty are the people that I really love, like the experts that have spent their whole life on. Let's just for ease of use, they're just studying like one type of bacteria their entire life, and that's all they've done, and they've spent 80 hours a day, like working on this one thing, and they come back and they say, well, yeah, and I'm just getting started. And I really don't know that much about it.
Right.
And I think there's so many of us, myself included, is I have to check myself and say, oh my gosh, it's okay being ignorant and looking foolish and saying, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z and step into ignorance. But I think, for your kids, again, going back to that foundation, I just love that, because if we had those decisions, then we could look at things like even like COVID or something and say, well, what do we believe is number one? Do we believe in personal liberty, or do we believe in the group versus the individual? And then you can have that conversation versus, I think in the political realm, so many people get caught up into, well, if you believe this, then you must also believe this, this, and this. And we put you in that camp, and then it erodes any opportunity for a genuine conversation.
Well, Kasim mentioned exposure, and I think there is a benefit to exposure of different ideas and stuff. But for a lot of things, I believe people know what to do, and yet they don't do it still. Or, like, let's talk about health. I think I could be making a giant assumption, but I think most people kind of know what it means to be healthy, and they don't do it. And then there's the paradigms that we have to fight, like allopathic or traditional sort of Western medicine. Yeah. That versus Thad, your view of things, right? So in referencing your mom, she had severe chronic issues. Yeah. And you helped her reverse all of them, and stuff that most doctors said, no, you're going to just have to take a lot of medicine forever.
Yeah.
And this is what you do with a lot of people, whether it's
Yes.
chronic pain or things like diabetes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do we need to know, first of all? And this is part of today's discussion. It's uncovering the stuff that people don't know, or maybe they think it's fairy tale or some weird magic science stuff.
Well, two ways. Do you want me to answer that more from like the science granular stuff, or more from the broader stroke perspective? Both. So I think, there's 3 studies that come to mind that to me completely changed my life. And it wasn't really, my life is regularly changing as I know more. I like to think that is anyways. And I've changed my mind on a couple big issues throughout my life because I try to pursue intellectual honesty. But there's 3 studies that I think really influenced the way that I view the world now. And that's the Milgram studies, the Asch conformity studies, and the Stanford prison experiment. And for those that don't understand that, Milgram studies is basically where basically you could get a stranger to shock someone to death. It was a fake setup, but the people thought they were killing somebody. So it basically said, if someone else tells you to do it, will you shock someone to death based on orders? The Asch conformity is, will you conform to a group giving the wrong answer, even though you know in your heart and your brain that it's the wrong answer? Will you still do it just to conform to the group? And then the other one is, again, the Stanford prison is if you relinquish responsibility for your actions, where do people go when they're given, when they're allowed to have their full monster come out? And I think but here's the thing about those 3 studies that I think most people miss, that wasn't reported by those, and those studies came out of World War II and Mali and Vietnam. It was like, how could people do such horrible things, right? Because we all here's the thing that the study didn't fully capture that I think is huge, is that when those participants would go home and they would tell their spouse or their friends what they did, and they think, gosh, I couldn't believe that I shocked this person all the way to death. I mean, even though they showed the guy was alive afterwards and it was a fake, but in their mind, they genuinely believe that they killed this person. You know what their response was? The vast majority of the time, their spouse was, if that was me, I wouldn't have done that. And I think those researchers could have spent more time and energy on that aspect. That's a whole nother study and it comes down to this thing is that when we see other people doing something, quote unquote, bad, whatever that means, we typically relate it to their intrinsic behavior. And when we do something, quote unquote, bad, we relate it to situational. So when we look at, what I look at that is when we look outward into the world, we judge people based on their character. And we oftentimes don't look at the circumstantial influence, but when we do something, it's nearly always justifiable. And I think if we can realize that all of us, to me, the step back, right, to think about our thinking like that next higher level is recognizing that if you do that, then you're normal. If you think that, if you think, how could that person cut me off? But then you would say, well, I had to cut him off because, I'm late for work. It's so easy to switch it, is recognizing, number one, that there's a tremendous amount of compassion and patience for others and ourselves if we recognize that environment is the single biggest predictor of behavior, and that we all are doing the best we can with what we have when we have it. And that if we were in their situation, no matter how horrible you think someone is, if we were raised by their parents, if we had their genes, we ate their foods, we watched the same TV shows, had the same friends that they did growing up, that we would be making the exact same decision and make the same choices that person is doing, given all of the influencing factors. So when I look at that, I look at okay, so that's like this overarching framework that I try to operate in that allows me to have patience and compassion with myself and others. And then when I look at someone like my mom, it's getting down to the guts of it, kind of looking at that same thing is, well, what are the pieces that we need for optimal health? And looking at it through that lens as best we can, and saying, what do we know to be true? What do we want? And how do those 2 pieces link together, be it diet, exercise, mindset, the right level of social interaction, the right level of laughter, all of these things we know, just like pool balls, if you hit a pool ball and the velocity, the mass, the acceleration, all of that, the friction, where it's going to go as soon as that pool ball is released. And I see that same perspective, I believe, can be applied to the entire world.
feel like the three of us, share a fascination with psychology and human behavior and what makes people tick. And I, for Thad's benefit, Kasim and I have chatted about something that fascinates me around human behavior and its relationship to technology. Specifically around, we'll start with Google, because I know that Kasim basically knows more about Google than Google does. And just to maybe blow Thad's mind a little and our audience, can you share essentially how Google works with respect to the, let's say, profiling factors and that component of things?
Google is a mechanism for cognitive dissonance by design. And so I don't dive too deep because I could bore everybody to sleep. Google algorithmically is a peer review program, because, and that's technically true. The Google PageRank, which is a play on words because one of the founders' name is Larry Page. PageRank was based off of the idea that the content on the site isn't nearly as important as who's linking to you, which is why you'll always get those annoying emails of people asking you to link to their website. That's what they're looking for. They want links to the site, and not all links are created equal. A link that's thematically appropriate from a trustworthy source shows Google, it's like a vote, to vote in your favor. That's a popularity contest. So if you think about it, let's look using, I think, medical terminology, or the medical industry is the best example of this. The medical article that Google ranks the highest, if you say, any COVID search, or why does my chest hurt, or whatever, is going to be the article that other doctors or other medical professionals link to the most. So it's a popularity contest. But, and I'm stealing this from Jordan Peterson, who I love dearly and deeply. I call him my digital dad. Jordan's comment on this was, that's not how science works. Right. Science isn't let's all vote. Science is actually hierarchical to the point of, usually it's 1 out of 100,000 people who make the discovery and say, oh, y'all, this is the thing. And then we go chase that. And so there's nothing meritocratic about Google's ranking system, number one. And then you're going to add the layer of complexity of you, because Google's not just ranking this according to peer review any longer. They're now ranking it according to what they know you're willing to engage with. So if they know Giovanni's more likely to click on article A, and they know Thad's more likely to click on article B, they don't care what's true. They care what's true to you. And that's terrifying, y'all. Because go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like it's whatever's going to get the pool ball in the hole, but not necessarily the right hole.
Not necessarily the right ball, and not necessarily on the right table.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could, and let's make this conversation really uncomfortable, and I'll distill it.
It's very effective, it's very efficient, but not effective in the right ways.
I could Google, why are Martians evil? And if I'm a racist person that would be more predisposed to disliking Martians, I'll go find some anti-Martian propaganda. But if you're a person that's, a little more liberal or accepting or whatever, you're going to find, like that. And it's so funny too, because you'll see this. If you ever want to, go Google. If you're on somebody else's computer, if somebody leaves their laptop open, start Googling things that you believe and see what it is that comes back to you. It's unreal, but it shifts. The big thing to point out would be like an election, like, oh, Google can shift and influence an election. Of course it can. More to the point, Google can shift what you think about yourself, what you think about others, what you think about money, and it's because they're not even being nefarious, y'all. It's not a bad thing. It's a machine learning mechanism that's trying to give you the content that you're looking for. So it's all the problems with humanity that have always existed, but accelerated to the nth degree, literally. So it's confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance, herd mentality, but amplify. That's why everybody's like, oh my goodness, we're more divided than we've ever been. Well, we're as divided as we've always been, but just far more efficient in those divisions, because technology is now lending itself to the divisions. And to add insult to injury, I don't know how to stop that. I don't know what the fix is. I know a problem well defined is half solved. And I stole that from somebody at Genius Network, by the way, Thad. I forget the young man's name. But beyond that, it's difficult to find an objective rate of measure. And really, I tell my children, what's the most important thing? Truth. I think truth is more important than love. And I've been challenged on that over and over and over and over and over again with everybody that I share these rules with and to. And I'm still sticking to it like a petulant child, because without truth, you've got nothing. And at the moment, we have more information than we've ever had. What is it? More information is created every day than existed prior to 1900 or something. I forget the exact measure, but that's more or less close to the real statistic. But we have zero ability to distill, because it's time that actually allows the wheat to be separated from the chaff, and the correct information to bubble to the surface, and we're not giving ourselves that luxury.
So given that, what and because it's clear that how your brain works in the systematic fashion. I'd love to hear this from both you, Gio, and Kasim. Is so given that, then how do we create the environment to where we can get in that 5% without being the top? Because here's the other thing too: is when you're in that 5%, you're oftentimes the tallest dandelion when the lawnmower comes, and so there's a lot of merit to playing small if you just want to be safe and you just want to kind of like, don't look at me, like I'm just rank and order, and versus people that really out there. Because I've had doctors that have swore at me, I've had doctors that have called me a scam, like all kinds of things, right? Tried to take me down and still do. And then to me, it's like you get to the point of where you get so good, where people can't ignore you anymore. But I'd love to hear, Gio, or both of you, is so given that framework, how do we filter and sift through that then? And what do we do to make that change as a society to where people are getting the right information, not just the most popular information?
I see it from the inside out, meaning the idea or concept of building a movement where I think the challenge is we all want to be that changemaker ourselves, and yet it can't ever be one individual. Even when it feels like it is one individual or one person's voice, it's amplified by the people who are aligned with them, who value the same thing, because they've built community. And I think that's how it has to start, from the inside out, meaning like concentric circles growing, where you have philosophy, you have values, you have mission, you have all these things, you start sharing these things. And it's like I'm circling back to Kasim saying I don't have religion, and to me, I think you do. It's just not a formalized one. And the fact that you have your rules for life means you have religion. It's one that you share with your family. And I don't know about that, but I'm going to guess for that, and for anyone watching or listening, I want to know all the rules. And maybe I can adopt that with my family. And that's how these things work. It starts for, the individual shares it, and you have, for lack of a better phrase, disciples, apostles, whatever. You're 12 people who think you're really awesome. And the word spreads in that way. And that's how you build a movement. And I think that's part of the solution to expand that way.
I like what you said. I would almost say that Kasim, I would hesitate using the word religion, because to me, religion is something that you can't have iterations of, from the standpoint of, here's like, let's just say the Bible, and you're not permitted to go back and say, well, let's change some words here and let's tweak this. That's the textbook. Because I'd like to think that for Kasim, it's more of, hey, these are my foundational principles. However, if something comes along and someone tells me that, that this needs to be bumped up, or this is different, or we find some better evidence, then that allows for those iterations, which to me, I think to me that's those are some of the fundamental differences between religion and science. Is one's a dogma and doesn't allow, it's true. It's like that phrase, I think it was from Gandhi, where he said, God used to be truth, and now truth is God. And I believe, and that's what you say, Kasim. I love what you said. Like truth is your number one, because that should be the overarching theme. I mean, and not to go down that too far, but it's like most people don't believe in Greek mythology anymore. Like most people don't think that Poseidon or Zeus like really are there anymore, because we've had different things. A lot of Native American cultures, don't believe like when a mountain blows up, it's because gods are angry at each other. Like we realize there's tectonic plates, or, so there's been iterations of that, but that was the science of the day. And the only difference is some religions allowed for iterations that either reinforced or eliminated them, and others just hold on to it fervently despite the presence of new evidence that suggests the contrary. So so I would maybe just consider like that framework, because, and I don't know, maybe correct me if I'm right or wrong, Kasim, but that have there been things of your heuristics that you've changed over time and or would be open to if information came contrary or otherwise?
I don't believe that my children's job, quote unquote, is done until they've updated the rules. So I know I'm deeply flawed on every level of analysis, and their role in this endeavor would be active participants. And so when they go to teach their children, what I want them to do is be like, yeah, this didn't work. This needs to be rephrased. This needs to be revised. This is missing.
Because the idea is you want it challenged, right? You want it challenged so either it breaks or it becomes fire hardened.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That would be the critical necessity. And it's context dependent. For instance, I think this is really important. I don't have little girls. I got 2 little boys. And that's a massive difference. If I had little girls, I think my rules would be very, very different. And so if somebody were to take this who has little girls, I'd want them to revise it with that paradigm, because I don't have that paradigm. I don't have that lens. And as they get older, things will change. And so I think so many, it's a dangerous thing to say that principles are context dependent, because you almost want principles that would be independent of context. But you start to lift the tangible application off at that point. At that point, all you can do is say words like, oh, truth, honor, bravery, responsibility. Like, you can just say these broad, but the minute you try to make tangible principles that apply, they have to be context dependent. And if they're context dependent, then they have to be updatable. Right. That was a bit of a departure, Thad, but I think what you're saying is absolutely right. I think that they need to be, it's like the Constitution. I have to get real weird with y'all fellas. The older I get, the more deeply patriotic I get. And I think that we have a ton of like horrible things about the US specifically that we could all poke at all day long, but holy shit. Like,
well, and that's it, right? It's to be able to hold an opposing view, and honor it. It's like I forget who said it, but it's, I don't agree with a damn word that you say, but I'll defend your right to the death to say it.
Yeah, and the ability to update our document, like, the Bill of Rights are arguably the most important part of the Constitution. They weren't there in the beginning, like we went and we added those later. Like, oh, we're probably going to need some of these. And I think that paradigm is something that we could absolutely bring forward. And I wonder whether or not, and this is hubris talking here, but I wonder whether or not religion would have found itself with a bit more in the way of longevity if it allowed for a bit in the way of iteration, because there's
100%.
Yeah,
because that's science.
Yeah, there's so much value to all of the religions and we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's so sad and scary to watch, because there is something there for people. And a lot of it's embedded in culture. I think we're losing our culture because the religions have things that are just vile. It's like, oh, slavery, misogyny, and racism, like, oh, and we have to bring those with us. But imagine if there was a mechanism through which we could update it and say, hey, there's some core tenets here that are amazing. Let's get rid of some of this, some of this stuff that maybe isn't quite as applicable now that we're 2,000 years along the line.
Yeah. What do you think, Giovanni? Do you have some principles or rules that for you and or your children?
We do. And to address what Kasim just said, there's a Bucky Fuller quote that you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You change them with a new model that makes the old one obsolete. Like I think, I think we are in that place where maybe we take all of the best things of the current religions and come up with something new and different that gives people something to follow, that isn't dogma, that is changeable, that is evolving, that creates a path to follow that we can agree on. I want to share something crazy, but since it's the two of you and no one else is listening to this, we can talk a little crazy. One thing I'm obsessed with is the idea of the fact that I believe we each have a gift. That's why this show is called The Gifted Show. That, to give 10-second context, when I was a kid, I was labeled as gifted because I have a super high IQ, went to gifted schools, got bullied because of it. And I hated it until I discovered the X-Men, where it's Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. And that changed everything. And my thing is, I don't think a small minority of us should be called gifted. I think we all have a gift, and it's in the value that we provide or the service to others. And what I've been thinking about lately is, if you identify your gift or things that make you gifted and you harness them, they become what I call a superpower. So, for example, that for years, people kept saying, Gio, you're such a great connector. And I brushed it off because I didn't understand it or believe it, because I assumed everyone else was like me, until I started really internalizing it and thinking, well, what if I actually believe what they're saying? And then I harness this, or I practice it, and I treat it like a skill or an ability. And now it's a superpower. And I think we all have that capability to take something that is a gift and turn it into a superpower. But now I'm thinking, what is the highest level of a superpower? And if one of my gifts is connection, the highest level would be connecting everybody. And this is what I've been thinking, like in terms of mission for me or purpose or any of those kinds of words, or with respect to, by the end of my life, what do I want to have matter? And I think there's something there for me, and it scares the crap out of me, but I think maybe that's a good sign that part of the unfolding of all this is there a way for me to connect everybody? In terms of what you were all just saying with division, or how there's always polarity now with everything that happens, people feel like, oh, which side am I on? And it's such a weird dynamic for me. And I feel like, what if, or how can we show people what Thad mentioned earlier, that we're all essentially the same person? We're the, for an analogy, we're born like this Mac computer I have in front of me with factory settings, kind of all the same. And then environments and things shape us, and we develop identity based on these things. And then we think we're unique and different, yet we're way more the same and connected than different, other than those shaped realities. And there's a way to come back to all of us feeling that connection. And to me, that connection is love, God, really, all these things, or the way I think religion was supposed to be. Like I remember I heard this quote, or I read it 20 years ago, and it's stuck with me the whole time, that Jesus wasn't Christian, Muhammad wasn't Muslim, Buddha wasn't Buddhist. They were all simply teachers of love. And I think that that's kind of the thing that's missing. It's how do we now operate our gifts at the highest level? And for me, it's this connection thing. So part of my mission is to do this.
So what when you think of that connection, Gio, what and I would agree with all that. I think you're an amazing soul, and I would say that that's a beautiful representation of what you're able to do in terms of you do bring people together and you connect that. So what does your gut tell you could be a solution to that?
Exactly. So step one is for me to declare these things and not keep it a secret in my brain, is to actually start talking about it and to speak it in a way that creates resonance for people who understand what I'm saying and agree with me and share the same philosophy. And then I think we all have this place where we can step up and lead the movement and lead the tribe, the community, whatever word you want to use. And building community is a thing for me. It's more from the entrepreneurial business context, but I think there's something bigger there. And I think step one is to step up, take responsibility and lead, start talking about it more, align with the people who align with me, and make the collective voice louder and see if it builds a movement. I can't stand people fighting each other for whatever their logic is. It's so annoying to me. And I think part of it for me is the gift of where I live. So I was born and grew up in Toronto. My parents are from Italy, so they moved here when they were young. And the cool thing about this city is that I believe it is the most, or one of the most multicultural cities in the world. we have more people from more countries here than anywhere else, and we respect each other's differences. Not that there isn't things like racism, it's everywhere, but not in the same way that it might be where you guys live. And I know more. I know how to recognize more languages than most people ever would. And I understand if someone is from this specific country, these are the things that matter to them. And we get to know each other. So I didn't grow up in that same thing. Like everyone's a brother and a sister. It's like the coolest thing here. And then to see division that's very polar with only kind of two sides, it's weird to me.
Well, I think that comes, well, Cosmos, you want to respond? I have some thoughts on that. It's kind of along the lines of, it's like the Zuckerberg thing right? Or Steve Jobs, where, like, why do you wear jeans every day? Or why do you wear the same, hoodie every day? Because you get decision fatigue. And so your life could potentially grind to a halt if you went through everything all day long and you tried to cognitively evaluate it. Because only 3% of what we actually do we're aware of why we're actually doing it. Like, oh, I think I'm hungry, I'm going to go eat. Yeah, but there was 1,000 other influences that triggered you that was the time for you to go eat. It wasn't that you just thought, oh yeah, I'm hungry now. Where does that thought come from? That thought comes from receptors in your stomach, your brain, all over. And you thought it was your idea. Like, give me a break. Number one. So first off, our thoughts aren't coming from us anyways, because who's even authoring those? But looking at it from the standpoint of, why did I put my teacup over here now that I'm finished with it versus I normally put it here and right in front of me? And maybe Gio, you just looked at your teacup, right? Like, I don't know. So it's like all of these things that we're doing, but we can't go through and evaluate it and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to put this teacup here today and there tomorrow, but where's the best place? Because your life could grind to a halt if you're trying to figure out, should my left leg or my right leg go in my pants first in the morning? Because every little decision that we make, you would just stop. And what I think has happened is, because we're all subject to the same human principles of behavior and psychology, is that we're looking for, we're to not kill the same word, but we're looking for heuristics to make our life easier. So if we're busy, we're heads down. We got to, think about the kids. We have life. We have all this stuff going on, and we're just checking off problems that we're solving all day long. Got to go to the grocery store, pick up the kids, make dinner, get to work. Is that okay? What's the election? Who am I voting for? Oh, well, I've already identified that I'm in this camp, so this is where I need to be. Okay, great, done. I can check that off. Okay, now what? And then you can get back to your other things that are pressing. Because to me, I look at it like, like Elon Musk, a thing from him is that, if you're able to take the emotion out of it and realize that as humans, we're every day, all day long, we're solving problems. That's all we're doing. And we're never fully satisfied. If you're thirsty, you go get a drink of water and that satisfies it. You solve that problem, right? And if you don't have water, you have to go find water. And a lot of people, getting water is a problem. But then after a while, that satisfaction lives short term, because now I have the urge to go to the bathroom. Well, now I got to find a bathroom. Am I at a public space, right? So we're constantly solving problems. So if we don't have the bandwidth or the space, like we have the luxury here to have this type of vivid conversation, it can be very difficult to pull people out and say, hey, we're going to put some energy into here, and we're going to challenge some deeply held beliefs, whether it be a religion. And to me, religion is just a dogma that can spill over to, people can have certain scientific dogmas. They can have personal dogmas, and they don't want to uncover that because of the energy and the suffering mentally that it takes to work, right? And by suffering, I mean like exercise. When you go to exercise, that's suffering in the moment. Just like thinking about tough things is a minor amount of suffering. So how do we get people to lean into the suffering and to create the space to go to that mental gym, if you will?
I think we are addicted to our identities. And I think we feel safety and comfort in who we believe we are. And I think making changes, especially around philosophy or belief, which is at the highest level, feels like a threat, almost like a deadly threat to our existence. Yeah. And we're scared to even maybe go in those directions. And I feel like if there was a skill set that we could help young people learn, or everybody, it's how to change your mind.
Yeah.
This is another thing that fascinates me, that part of the fighting that happens and debating and arguing, or all these things happening on social media, is that people take a stance. And I think it's important to do that, but then they have zero willingness to be okay to change their mind.
Yeah. Or even have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many doctors that I said, hey, we have really opposing views on COVID, and you're a respected MD. I have my clinics, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a discussion. And we would kind of go back and forth, and to get to this point, oh, great, we really have different views. Let's have a discussion. Oh no, I don't want to do that.
Well, you just said the magic words, respected MD. Here's the challenge that happens. Imagine you have that a client or patient, whatever word you use, and you tell them, hold on, you should probably do this, this, and this. And those might say, well, let me speak to my medical doctor. They go to that person.
Yeah.
Says, Dr. Thaddeus told me, and they're like, no, you're going to take my pills that because for the past 50 years, this is exactly how I've done it. And their fear is that if you're right, if that Dr. Thaddeus is right, and what would it mean for them to be wrong? And they have all the credentials and stuff, and they're afraid of that. So this is the challenge that we're facing.
Yeah.
I want to shift a bit, because I want to make sure we cover this. I like talking about beliefs that have changed and things that people, or maybe paradigm shifts for people. And I think there's going to be a big paradigm shift, Thad, with you raising your voice or sharing your platform more around the idea of not paying taxes.
Yeah. Well, 53% of the US doesn't pay taxes already. And I say it a little tongue in cheek because some of them don't make enough, but others have figured out the game. So I say we only need 47% to go until we have complete liberation.
So can you explain how you help people with this, or what the point of view is, or what we need to know? Maybe we'll start there.
Yeah. So I think it first starts with a philosophy, and that is that when I bring that up, I get a lot of people that share some hate, and understandably, because they say, well, who's going to pay for roads? That's like the common thing, right? And I think first off, it comes, it's that Dunning-Kruger effect, where I think a lot of people, they don't realize that they don't even know what they don't know. And if someone were to go through and actually show them all of the taxes that they're already paying, they would be absolutely blown away by how much they're spending. When I look at how much real estate, just as a perfect example, like how much real estate that I own and how much I pay in property taxes, I am single-handedly, I don't want to say, I'm not trying to be preposterous, because I know there's a lot, I have a team and I know there's renters and all that, but I'm saying like at the end of the day, I'm the one writing the check to the local governments that is paying the complete salary of multiple teachers every single year in the school districts. And I have 0 children. So I think it's important to recognize that's an example of an excise tax versus income tax versus sales tax. There's all different types of taxes. First off, I'm a fan of excise taxes that people can opt in or opt out of, meaning like, I don't think people realize that, at least in the US, a lot of roads, there's gas taxes. So when you go to the pump, people don't realize that they're paying a certain percentage of that goes to the roads. But now, to me, that's the beautiful thing, because it puts the individual above the collective. And the individual can say, I don't want to pay that tax, because a tax at the core level, it is an extraction of life whenever there's a transaction. And whenever there's a transaction, there's an exchange of value between two individuals. There's always going to be some energy lost, but that's a overt energy, not loss, but extraction that takes away from both people's lives. And to me, it's the only thing that you have. So I don't know if you guys are Princess Bride fans, but like when he goes down in the bottom and he like has this machine that sucks out like 20 years of your life, yep. Like that's what the government is. That's what tax is. It's literally sucking your life out of you. And so excise taxes that people can opt out of or opt in, I'm 100% for that. If you don't want to pay a gas tax, walk. If you don't want to pay a gas tax, ride your bike. Like you can opt out. But to me, to have an indiscriminate income tax, that's my boldest, brightest, biggest issue, is because I don't think that someone else, a stranger, typically doesn't take someone else's money and spend it on somebody else, and they're not good stewards of it. There's so much removal. A stranger taking money from a stranger to pay it, to give it to a stranger. There's so little care of that. I mean, I love my team to death, but I have a team of about 70, 80 now, and I love them to death. So please don't take this the wrong way. But I know if you look at it, that some team members, the way that they spend money or the way that they think the company has money, you can tell that they don't have the ownership mindset by how they look at money. Now, just do that to the umpteenth degree to where someone has the monopoly on force, and they can come in and just say how spending is going to be and just extract money. So for me, one of my big things is helping people reduce and eliminate taxes. To me, next to health, is the most important thing, because it's giving you back your life that you've already worked for and you've already created for yourself.
Can you give one idea or one strategy of how you help people with this? Maybe even around real estate
Yeah. Oh yeah. An easy example in real estate would be, and this might be pretty quick, so if we need to come back to it, we can do that. But if you buy a piece of real estate for, let's say 10% down, you bought $1 million property for $100,000. And let's say you do what's called an accelerated depreciation or cost segregation study, you could write off maybe $300,000. So you could take $100,000, buy $1 million of property, get a $300,000 tax write-off. And after a few years, when that property appreciates and you paid on the principal, you have this growing equity, and you refinance, you pull out $100,000 to $200,000 to $300,000, 100% tax-free. And then if you go use that on business expenses, you can lower your tax rate even again. And after about 1 to 3 years, you can set up a system to where you'll never pay taxes again. That's one of an infinite number of examples and ways you can eliminate and reduce taxes while also growing significant tax-free wealth for the rest of your life.
Mind-blowing. You mentioned your team. There's one thing I want to make sure I cover from Kasim, because I'm profoundly curious about your hiring process. And earlier, Thad mentioned the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. And what do you call your hiring process?
The Pareto talent system.
So I don't actually know what it is, and I want to know.
I run a marketing agency, and I tell everybody, clients and staff included, there's only 3 things you can sell in a marketing agency: people, programs, processes. Programs and processes are pretty easy, and they're generally speaking accessible to all of us. So all the programs and processes are more or less the same. The only differentiation for us and for a lot of businesses are the people. My experience has been, especially young entrepreneurs, but most entrepreneurs try to get the most out of their people for the least amount of money. And I think that this is a significant error. What I've done is attempted to only hire, because, and if you're not familiar with the Pareto principle, it's more or less 20% of the people are going to do 80% of the work. 20% of your customers are worth 80% of your revenue. And what's interesting is just how ubiquitous it is in life. 20% of your food yields 80% of your nutrition. Like, it's unreal. If you dig into almost any distillation of value, you end up with a Pareto principle, to the point to where it's almost something that's worth a religious study. It's like, is this from God? Because it's that pervasive. So what I decided was, I'm only going to hire the 20%. And I've been challenged, like, if a statistician's listening to this, he's like, well, that's stupid, because then you're going to have a Pareto. And what's really funny, to make this more convoluted, if you look at the 20%, there's a Pareto distribution within that 20. And then if you look at that 20%, so there's no way really to do this. But the philosophy I wanted to approach this with was, I'm only going to hire the 20%. I'm going to hire assassins. The first thing I do is I pay more than anybody else is willing to pay. And what's funny about that is, in order to do that, you only need to pay 10 to 40% more. But you get 5x out of this person, literally. And then I have a system of hiring that allows me to see, and it's very Socratic in nature, and it's also dilutive. Most people don't have the threshold for pain to jump through all of our hoops. But by the end of it, I end up with just the most amazing folks. I've got 70 some odd employees now. And every single one of them is smarter than I am, industrious, caring, and they match our values. My values in my business, it's on my website. They're the same values I teach my children. It's truth, responsibility, and love, in that order. Not in that order from importance, but in that order chronologically speaking. And I hire to those values. And I ask really specific questions that kind of yield. Like one of my favorite questions on the interview process, there's a Lebanese Christian poet named Khalil Gibran that I love. And he has embedded in one of his poems is the statement, work is love made visible. And so I asked the question, what does this quote mean to you? Work is love made visible. And instantly I'm allowed to see the way that this person views how they spend their day, because that's so important. If you think work is work, like it's this thing, thank God it's Friday. Those folks, they're not good hires. The TGIF types, and I'm not trying to be dismissive or disparaging because I know some jobs just suck, but I want to find someone who can find love in work. And I think that they're out there. As a matter of fact, I think it's everybody. It's just, you have to make sure you put the right person, it's that whole, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree thing, put the right person on the right seat on the right bus. And oh my goodness. And I've had that experience.
How do you know they're a 20%er? Is it strictly from the interview, or are there other flaws?
No. So to maybe get more tactical, and I've got a whole YouTube video where I break this down. It's almost an hour long. So if anybody has any interest, and I'm not trying to push my YouTube channel here, Giovanni, but I want to let you know, like I'm giving away this value. I'm not trying to tease anyone. The most important thing that you can do is make sure that your job description is well defined. A lot of people approach from above, like you must comply with this, and we might deign to look at you, and I do the exact opposite. I sell my agency, and then I because if you want talented people, you can't approach from above. You have to at a minimum approach as peers. And I begin every job description with you must follow the instructions, or your submission must read, I actually follow the instructions or you won't be considered. And what's so funny is sometimes I'll get subject lines that say I actually follow the instructions, and then the email body doesn't follow the instructions. And then the instructions are very specific, but I'll do things like everybody has to go through a paid trial. I pay in advance for the trial project that they do. And I pay in advance because I get ghosted about 20% of the time. And instantly I've been able to, for a small sum of money, figure out who's, lacks integrity and who doesn't. And then, the trial project, I'll do stuff like, let's say I need you to do a project. I'll send you a username and a password to log into something in order to complete this project. And I won't give you a deadline. I'll ask you to give me the deadline because I want to see whether or not you can manage time. And I want you to tell me how long this is going to take you. The username and password I send you, I'll send you the wrong password on accident. And now I get to see how long does it take for this person to go verify that everything that I've provided to them, they have all the tools available and accessible. Because if you tell me, oh yeah, I'll have this to you by Friday at noon, and Friday at 10:50, I get a frantic email saying the password doesn't work. So there's lots of little teeny tiny things. Yeah. Well, and to the point that you're a phenomenal entrepreneur, you'd probably be a really bad employee. I would be 100%. Too. So you want to, and I'll do other stuff too. It depends on the role. You want to really get into the mindset of the role. When I'm hiring a client manager, I'll have them schedule an appointment with me. And then I'll tell them, you pick the video sharing tool and then send me instructions as though I'm somebody whose technical proficiency you're unsure of. And then I'll wait for 5 minutes before the meeting and I'll cancel. Say, hey, sorry, something came up. Please reschedule. Some people don't reschedule. If you work for me as a client manager and a client jettisons on the meeting and you're not able to follow up and reschedule, and then you're going to come to me later and we're like, well, they canceled, like you're an excuse maker. So, and I want to see how you respond to that. Are you going to respond with kindness, empathy, grace? Or are you going to, like, gosh, man, you just screwed up my whole calendar. So think about the role, think about the things that you want to see, and then embed those into your hiring process. And it's not difficult. It's tedious. There's 4, 5, 6 steps to my hiring process, most of which now are accomplished by VAs or my operations manager. And then at the very end, I get on the phone with folks and I just talk to them like they're humans. And I think the very last thing I'll say on this topic is you really have to love people. And I know that sounds naive and quixotic, but it's so true. And clients and employees, but and to love someone is just to want the best for them. And so for my staff, and I hope that they feel this way, I know work is work and you're being paid to do it. And if you weren't being paid to do it, you wouldn't do it. But within the confines of that, I want them to feel valued. And the only way to make somebody feel valued is to actually value them. So it's like, try to catch them doing things right and try to create an environment that they'd be happy about and try to let them lead, provide them with autonomy. Because if you go get a badass racehorse, you got to let the racehorse run. There's no micromanagement. I've got other friends in the agency space who are like, oh, you have to track your hours and we screenshot your desktop and, you can't take, I don't track time off. I don't track PTO. I've been in business for 15 years. I've never tracked PTO. I've been burned on that by 2 employees, twice. I've probably employed hundreds of people over the last 15 years. It's like, hey, if you're getting your stuff done, I don't, if you need to check out, you're having a bad day, you want to go and watch Netflix, I don't care. I don't care. You're in charge of your schedule. You're in charge of your tasks. You're in charge of your clients. And if you're performing, God bless you. Go be efficient. And it's worked out really, really, really well.
Can you teach that? And I'm kind of directing this to Thad. So I'm segueing. See that? But so the idea of autonomy, really, it's personal responsibility.
Mm.
And I know, Thad, this is a thing for you. Can you, or maybe the better question is, how do I teach personal responsibility to my kids? And how do we, is it something that is inherent, or how do we teach personal responsibility as a philosophy? Because I think part of the solution that we're talking about in different facets today is around people taking responsibility and ownership of outcomes and things that happen. And
Yeah.
So what is your thought on that?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, and maybe just to put a potential open loop that might be out there, is that even though I don't believe that there is free will, it doesn't mean that you can't make decisions. It just means that, if you're looking at picking chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream, you can still decide which one you want. My argument is that whatever you're going to decide has already been determined, whatever you land on. So it can potentially be a little bit dualistic in the sense of, we tell individuals to take responsibility for their actions. And I think it really comes from that empowerment. I do think humans are wired to be fair. And I hesitate even using that word because I don't even like that word really, because it's so subjective. But let me back up and say to be compassionate. I think that was from Franz de Waal, who did Chimpanzee Politics. And I don't know if you guys ever read that, but he talks about there was this tree that the chimpanzees would denude this forest and this playground that they had. And so they put this wire mesh around the trees so they couldn't climb up there, because they wanted some of these trees to try to recover a little bit, because they just kept going for it. And so what happened was they had this chimpanzee would take this branch that they found, and he leaned this branch against the tree. And so they could get over like this barbed wire, this fenced area. And what happened was one chimpanzee actually supposedly held the stick, while the other chimpanzee, like a ladder, basically climbed the ladder, the stick that they made. And when the chimpanzee went to the top, they got a bunch of leaves and came down and actually shared the leaves.
Mm.
So then when you look at that, and then when you look at also like with the Milgram study, the shocking thing, the Milgram study, if you guys haven't watched that or read the book, definitely, I've done both, and it's just phenomenal in terms of if you can watch it and just listen to yourself. Because, and I will complete this here for you a second into your question, Gio, and that is when the person was told to shock the person, the other person, when the test subject was instructed to shock the actor, they found that when the person was on the other side of the room, a lot of people would go all the way to the end to where they basically thought they were killing them. And then when they brought them into the room to where they could see them, the numbers went down. And when they sat them right next to them, it went down even further. And when they got it to the point of where they had to put their hand on top of them and then deliver the shock, it went down dramatically. With the idea being that closeness breeds compassion.
Mm.
The closer that we are to somebody, seeing them visually, touching. That's why they say when you're arguing with your partner, hold their hand and then try to have an argument.
I haven't heard that. Why didn't you tell me that 20 years ago?
Yeah, right. because here's the thing, but here's the thing is I would say this. I would say, I mean, whenever my team says, "Hey, we're having this issue," and I say, "Well, have you picked up the phone yet?" "Well, no." "Well, then you need to meet in person."
Mm.
It's kind of like if you don't have 15 minutes to meditate every day because you're too busy, you should do it for an hour.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. If you haven't picked up, if you're already angry with someone and you're, oh, their text said this, like you're already losing, because texting does not carry emotion. So I kind of say, have you resolved this via the phone yet? No, I'm not going to call them. Then you need to meet. If it's gotten that bad, then you need to meet them in person. And I think the biggest thing that I would say for children is recognizing that we're inherently wired to be compassionate. We're inherently wired to care about those that are closest to us. So I think several things, Gio, is number one, that you're 100% responsible for everything in your life. I think that is the biggest empowerment you can get. Just like Cosmo, you said, is someone an excuse maker or a problem solver? I don't have the word problem with our team. If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, we got a problem," I said, "What?" And they're like, "Okay, yeah, that's right, Dr. Gala. We have an opportunity for a solution." Because it's shifting the mindset of, number one, I'd say being 100% responsible for everything in our life. If we're able to recognize the stoicism that there is no good or bad, it just is, and we get to decide whether we want to make something good or bad by which cognitive bucket we put that in, and that everyone is doing the best that they can with what they have when they have it, and we lead with love and truth, like, to me, it's game over. If you can reinforce those principles and those ideals and give examples and educate, because it takes a while, I believe, to really understand what that is. I'm even continuing to really learn it, and I've spent hours on it. If you can make that part of your life to really recognize that, and anytime you feel yourself get heated, to take a step back and say, what can I do to influence this? Where am I not taking responsibility? Do I recognize that that person is doing the best that they can? Do I recognize that environment is the biggest single predictor of your behavior? And I would be doing the exact same thing if I was them and in their shoes. And I think reinforcing that as much as possible and being compassionate and patient in that education, I think would be paramount.
There's a thing that's popped up in my brain, and when that happens, I want to bring it up. This is for Kasim. I'm struggling with the word truth. And I'm curious about, I'm a word nerd. I love language. I love etymology. I love the power of language. And I'm curious how you define it, as it's your number one rule.
Right.
What does that mean for you? Because I feel that for a lot of people, the concept of truth is very subjective to their experience and their belief structure. And I think they confuse belief with truth. So I'm curious what it means for you.
It's a question I haven't answered for myself, which shows a fair degree of, let's say, hypocrisy, given that it is my most important rule. But I'm gonna do my best to dance around it, Gio, and maybe y'all can help me.
Yeah, sure.
I think truth is what is, and I think simple definitions are okay. And I just want to protect myself there for a moment, because in order to build sound structures have big blocks, so we're not going to get ultra granular just yet, but I think that truth is what is. And then I think that truth ends up having it's meta. There was a conversation between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a famous atheist and brilliant, like surgical with his intellect. And Peterson's the only human I've ever seen with a theological predisposition that didn't just get like railroaded by Harris. Like, they actually met and they clashed. And it was that, unstoppable force and immovable object. And their very first argument, people were pissed because they spent 3 hours debating the definition of the word truth. And Sam Harris took the scientific route. What is technically true? Jordan Peterson took the philosophical route. The truth of all truths. What's meta true? And one of the things that Peterson says that I, even though I'm not a theologian, that I lean towards is, he used the biblical stories. He said, I know that they're not technically true, but they're meta true, which means maybe they're more true than the thing that actually happened. So this man and this woman who was made from his rib, like, obviously that didn't happen. And I think most adults know that. If you were to really sit down with somebody theologically committed, I think you get that out of them. But just because it didn't happen doesn't mean that the lesson, the distilled lesson, isn't true. And maybe it's actually more true, because the interesting thing about these stories, and a point that I wish Peterson brought up to Harris, it infuriates me that he didn't, because I've heard him make it elsewhere, is these stories, these religious stories, have been discovered by almost every major culture since the advent of man. And it's not like aliens are coming and giving us the same books over and over again. It's that humans are finding the same truths. There's a consistent, ongoing thread. And that's so important to think about. That's why when I say I wish I had religion, it's because me coming up with my own rules is hubris. Like there's 2 trillion years of evolution and people before us that learned things that stacked on top of each other. And I can't just throw all that about. So I think, to answer your question, truth is a journey. It's a call to action. It's a call to adventure. It's a requirement that we constantly seek that which is true. So it's not really a statement as much as it is, it's not a flag in the ground.
I'm one thing I'm obsessed with is the idea of, or the concept around storytelling, how we share and disseminate information over time through stories. And, is a fictional story true? And then only now looking back over my life, everything that was taught to me as a kid, as fact, as truth, just for fun, I want to question. And here's how it kind of started. When you are a kid, you're taught things. This is how it is. This is how to tell time, as an example. This is the calendar. These are the months. So you're like, okay, yeah. I observe how time works, and time is true, and calendar is true. And then, I don't know, 6 months ago, I discovered we used to only have 10 months. Do you guys actually know this?
No.
Okay. So we used to only have 10 months. And the sort of proof of it for anyone who likes language like I do, September, the month of September comes from, I think, Latin, like SEPT is the Latin word for 7. Or if you think of French, or if you speak maybe Spanish, I'm not sure about Spanish. October, octo means 8. November, nove means 9. December, deca is 10. That used to be months 7, 8, 9, 10. But in the Roman times, they wanted to honor their 2 favorite emperors, Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. So they added July and August to honor their 2 favorite people.
That makes sense.
10 months. But how do you add months? Like, I was like, wait a minute. Like, how do you can't add time? This is all perfectly figured out. So then I realized it's not. And then to understand that numbers don't exist, like numbers don't exist in nature. 1, 2, 3, those are all man-made ideas to create
describe
just a description of things. It's like, what do you mean numbers don't exist? You're taught this is 1, this is 2. So all of these things that I've started to sort of question, almost as a fun experiment, but to realize, okay, so what the hell is real? What is true? So I'm not necessarily trying to challenge you or anything. It's more of, I want to have the conversation to figure this stuff out.
No, it's a critically important challenge. And I think that's why it's the most important thing, because it's the hardest. Because all the way down to fundamental levels, like what is true is such an important question, and everything that we do, and to a point that Thad has made quite a few times. And I know we won't have time to dive into this, but I'd love to have a follow-up conversation about free will, because I do believe in free will. And I'd like to be beat up a little bit, and maybe have my paradigms questioned. But what is true is the prerequisite to free will, because you can't act until you know or think you know what is true. That's how you would decide how to move forward.
Boy, I feel like we have a whole other session we need to schedule now.
Well, why don't we end here on a giant open loop? And I feel like I say this to everybody, but one of the things I love about this show is with this format, what I treat it episodic, as if it's a TV show or a series. And what I want is recurring characters, which means you're both invited back, right, to continue conversations. And I'm
100% for it. I'd be honored.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's great.
So thank you both for today's mind-blowing discussion. I can't wait to watch this again, maybe take some notes.
Likewise.
I look forward to having you both back.
Let's do it.
Appreciate you having us, Gio. Thank you. Dad,
thank you guys so much. Thank you both.
Now the scales of life have finally been balanced. It's time for you to find your voice. To create the most impact in the universe, the planet needs to hear your story. Millions around the world are searching for you. I'm here to tell you that you, my hero friend, need to step out from the shadows. See you next time, as our next set of guides will show you how to speak to the world.